Welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Greg Terrusian, founder of Samson Rose, a recruiting and search business focused on the robotics and AI industries. The Machine Minds show is where we dive deep into the intricate world of robotics and artificial intelligence. As a staffing industry leader with a passion for the frontiers of technology, I'm pleased to be bringing you intimate conversations with the founders, investors, and trailblazers who are at the heart of the AI and robotics revolution. In each episode, we dig into their journeys, the applications of the products they're working on, and the breakthroughs that are shaping our future. Join us as we explore how these machine minds are transforming the way we live, work, and understand our world. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just curious about this amazing field, you'll learn something new with each episode. Let's delve into the extraordinary. Let's delve into Machine Minds. Hello and welcome to Machine Minds. I'm your host, Greg Terrusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Alex Hall, CEO of Concrete.ai. Thanks for being on the show today, Alex.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Let's jump into it. Look, so Alex, your career path, it's quite fascinating leading up to your current role as the CEO. So can you just give us a background and kind of set the stage for us, like what your journey in the tech and construction industries looks like and any pivotal moments that kind of led you here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started off in construction. I did a degree in construction management in South Africa, and really fortunate in being able to work for a company that was multinational, did work South Africa and Australia, and I managed to do some work in Botswana and really got to see sub-Saharan Africa a lot, but pretty quickly figured out that, as a 22-year-old that enjoyed being around the city and playing sport and stuff, I probably wanted to do something that would be close to home and didn't have me traveling as much. And so I ended up working with a cement company in South Africa called Holcim. And over time, got to experience various roles with them, not just on the concrete side of things, but also in the aggregate mining world. And then was really fortunate to be transferred to the US in 2007. Got involved in same aggregate and ready-mix businesses, mainly in the Middle Eastern part of the country. And then my final role with Holcim was actually in charge of their ready-mix performance group. So having oversight over the US different concrete businesses, understanding the challenges and realities that they were faced with. And then, I pivoted back into the construction world and ended up working for a construction company called Suffolk out of Boston, and really, really interesting opportunity with them. Got involved in the health and safety side of things there, and then also into business systems and really understanding the different influences within the business and trying to organize and streamline to have some kind of consistent process, which is not always the easiest thing to do in construction.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into a bit of that about the industry as a whole. So what initially attracted you to the mission of Concrete.ai, and how did your previous experiences shape your approach to leading this company?
No, that's a great question. I mean, well, I guess this all starts with the reality that cement companies have really understood, for the better part of 3 to 4 decades. I can certainly say that way back in the late 1990s, they were really talking about green cement and the impact of cement on the environment specifically from an embodied carbon perspective, the CO2 emissions associated with the product. And I can remember, part of this whole green concept already being a big part of the conversation back in South Africa in the early 2000s. So fast forward to my roles in the US, and the craziest thing I remember on the actual inception of this concept was I was reading a Ray Kurzweil daily blog, and there was this photograph of a professor from UCLA who was holding up what looked like a filter. And basically the headline was concrete technology developed that can actually absorb CO2. And the bells went off, because this is like double whammy. If you can find a way to solve the problem by utilizing the output, well, awesome. And I got in touch with the guy. His name is Gaurav Sant. He's a professor at UCLA. I tried to find out more about the product. Was actually really interested in seeing whether Wholesome would go down an investment path with them and introduce the product to them. That never actually materialized. I stayed and remained involved with Gaurav and UCLA and started talking about different opportunities. One of them that came up at that point he raised it was, is there a need for the application of AI within concrete, but on the design side of it? And frankly, I'd never given it a thought, but once he kind of explained what he meant, then it became, hell, this is a no-brainer. And it wasn't just from the sustainability perspective, it was 100% from the commercial aspect, right? It's like super low margin business. Yeah, historically, EBITDA margins for the ready-mix business in the US have been around 8%. We own the distribution fleet typically in the US as well. So depreciation cost tends to be higher than it would be in, say, Europe or Southern Africa, Australia. So this is a really low profitability business from an EBIT perspective. And you work really hard to generate that kind of money. And if there's any way you can use the raw materials, which are 65% of your cost, depending on the type of concrete you pour in, and reduce that cost, you're going to have a massive impact downstream from a profitability perspective. So that really pricked my ears from a perspective of performance management. The other reality is that cement is 50% typically of that 65% of the raw material cost. It's 95% of the carbon. And so if there's anything you can do about the cost, you're going to massively probably reduce the carbon load at the same time. So yeah, that was the departure point, and got permission from the CEO of the company to start providing the guys at UCLA with some data sets. Gave them some data sets from the western region of the company, which was out in Denver. And yeah, that's kind of the impetus. That's where we started applying real world data to the models. I left Wholesome, joined Suffolk, remained involved. And this has eventually grown over time. So fast forward to around 2020, we were ready to think about whether this would be a commercial proposition. And at that stage, UCLA had got a grant from the Federal Highways Association. Added more data, had a whole lot more producer data that they got out. And by the end of middle of 21, we decided this is time to pull the trigger and to start going commercial and see what we can do. And yeah, that's really how it turned out to be the business it is.
Wow. So you were involved from like really early inception, providing the data and helping kind of like the guidance from the commercial aspect.
Well, look, so the reality is that the concept is the brainchild of Gaurav and Matthew in terms of
right.
how are we going to apply different types of neural networks to get this done, and obviously that's evolved over time, and certainly the methodology has changed even in the last couple of years. The approach that we've taken is totally different, but it's absolutely their concept. I just was thinking about it selfishly from a commercial aspect to say, listen, I think if you're going to deploy this technology, you want to have a commercial upside, because as important as the sustainability element is, that's not necessarily a business. And even now, that remains true.
It's true. It's so true. Well, we hear about it all the time, at least on this show, when we talk to founders and executives, but then also on the venture side. The best companies, the most successful companies that they've seen in their career have been people who really understand the technology, but then coupled with someone who really understands the industry that they're trying to attack. They don't always have to be in the same people, but having that commercial awareness and then also how you can apply a knowledge of how you can apply this tech to the industry. So in this case, just having the environmental impact is great, but like who would provide that on a commercial standpoint wouldn't be. But then if you're giving that insight and you're able to say, let's take your brainchild and really make it into this other thing, that's huge.
Which is kind of interesting because to some extent, I actually kind of misinterpreted how quickly people would adopt. I really thought, if we could demonstrate how effective we can be,
Hmm.
Adoption will be relatively quick, from an industry perspective. And honestly, it's been a challenge. I think there's a there's kind of a natural aversion in any industry that has got such a heavy risk focus as the concrete
Mm.
industry does. I mean, um, a failure in concrete ultimately will result in a structural failure in a building, and that could absolutely be catastrophic. So, you absolutely understand why people are a little reluctant to take chances. But
Yeah.
the journey for us has taken effectively from when we decided to commercialize at least 2 years to go from pilot phase and then actually demonstrate to people, listen, this is how we can help you, and not only from the commercial perspective, but also understand the sustainability aspect. This is where there's potentially a whole different market where you've got people that are entities that are building data centers that have got net zero targets, and the realization is there that, oh yeah, my scope 3 category 2 emissions are probably going to be my biggest concern in terms of embodied concrete,
Yeah.
embodied carbon. Concrete and steel are the two biggest ones we got to think about. What are we going to do about it? So yeah, it's kind of fun because there's a market development aspect to this as well that doesn't exist, that we've had to go and create. And yeah, it's being part of the challenge. But hopefully we can. The light at the end of the tunnel is, we know it's not a train, and it's looking good.
That's great. Yeah, I was gonna ask you, starting a company. I mean, starting any company isn't easy or smooth, right? But then in a traditionally slow to adopt industry like construction must have its own challenges, and they're not always thinking about new investment or adopting new technology. So there must have been so many different hurdles to overcome. And then, firstly, and then on top of that, like how you actually communicating the benefit of the product and convincing them that it's worthwhile, you know?
Um, it's you have to learn really quickly, and I think the one thing we've done pretty well is being able to pivot.
Mm.
Um, um, I think very quickly there was a realization, and again, I think very grateful for my time within Suffolk, because you've got to appreciate that there's so many layers to construction. If you have a look at, just I'm an owner developer, and then where do I go? So I got an architect and maybe some kind of an owner's representative to get my concept done and figure out where I'm going to from there. And then, they'll make the connection with the general contractor. General contractor, it's the sub. Sub will go to a placing sub, and then they'll go to the concrete company. And,
Yeah.
in these kind of 6 degrees of separation, there's a massive disconnect between what these guys can do and what these guys are actually looking for. And this is, been a big part of our journey is almost having to bifurcate our messaging to go to owners on one side of the equation and being able to say to them, we think we can do this for you. Let's try and demonstrate that. And in fact, our very first customer is a company that builds data centers. And we've regularly been able to go out and help them reduce their embodied carbon by sort of 20% on every data center that they've been able to put out. But the commercial side is definitely on the ready mix producer side, because we're looking at assist them in terms of being able to provide a product that meets all the engineering requirements, but at the same time has got a lower cost basis. And that's through the utilization of the same materials, because their source materials don't change, right? It's still the same cement. It's still the same aggregate. It's different admixtures. It's really just thinking about how you can redesign that recipe with the same materials but in different proportions to give them
Yeah.
ultimately this outcome that they're looking for. And so, all these different things are forever changing. So on that side of things, it actually helps us, because we being able to provide a service that runs in the background effectively. I mean, the software's name is Concrete Copilot for a reason. It's because the optimization is happening in the background while the humans are doing what they need to do, which is apply the judgment and make sure the customers are happy, because ultimately people still buy from people and they're not buying from the AI.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and even in terms of the marketing strategy, it's you got to be really direct in terms of being able to get to not only the decision makers, but the people that inform the decision makers, that you can actually trust this technology, and being able to demonstrate to them how it works. Yeah, it's been interesting, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
That's great. Yeah. The industry, the construction industry as a whole, there's sometimes criticism, right? That they overpromise and underdeliver, especially I'm assuming in the startup space, right? You want to get ahead, but how do you guys ensure to avoid that pitfall? Because I'm sure if you do that once, you kind of like burn a bridge, right? It's not like engaging a contractor for your house and you're like, "Oh, they said 2 months and now I'm here 5 months later still going." You can't do that with technology in this case. Like you said, that's so important for avoiding failures.
I mean, yeah, look, there's a list of construction tech startups as long as my arm that have done exactly that. I mean, some with some really great promise. Katera is probably one that comes to mind. That was really a big deal. But yeah, from our perspective, I think, and this was probably also talks to the reality in terms of our growth and how it's happening in a lot more measured way than this massive spike we anticipated. Is that we tend to be somewhat conservative on the modeling side of things. So, you get one chance to make a first impression. And the reality has been for us, every time we go out and do a pilot with a potential new client, we try and do things as quickly as possible, but we actually end up erring on the side of caution. So the models, when we start with, are superior in terms of the recipe output to what a producer would get. But we model with a high degree of conservancy in terms of what we provide them. So we ensure that 99.9% of the time, the models are actually going to over predict in terms of, I beg your pardon, under predict in terms of what the strength development is going to look like. And this then gives the client a degree of certainty that this product that they've been promised is actually going to be able to do what they require it to do.
Yeah.
And save not only the cost that they're looking for from a cost perspective, or carbon, depending on what the objective is, but they're going to have the certainty of performance. The good thing about it is that we do this on purpose, but we have a very strong active learning component within our networks that over time will continue to learn and continue to improve. So wherever the client starts at is not necessarily where they're going to finish at, and that's a really important thing. So there's ongoing opportunity for them, but it's a critical part of the trust component. You can't afford a failure with this. That's a reality.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we fail, and we don't want to see people go out of business. That's not the idea, and we certainly don't want to.
Especially when you're like creating this demand and this market as well. It's like even more detrimental to do it wrong on the first chance, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think if there's been a lot of focus on carbon construction and specifically as it relates to carbon, concrete, and steel, and all sorts of different initiatives out there in terms of using CO2 to mineralize and stuff like that. And I think it's wherever we go, what we've always ensured that we could do is that whatever we claim we're going to be able to do, we want to be able to do in a laboratory first. If you can do it in a lab, it's highly likely that you can simulate external influences in a lab. But then once you've done that, then you go out and you actually do it in the real world. So again, it's a little bit of a conservative approach. We know this. I think the reality is that over time, we think the adoption will come because of this approach that we've taken. And once people are used to start seeing these more regular results in tangible real world conditions, as we've been doing for effectively a year now, that starts building the trust in the product. But if you can't, in our mind, if you can't simulate something in a laboratory, you can't actually test the product in the lab, you've got a real problem. And so, that's very much the approach we've taken. Prove the concept and then go and do it.
Perfect. How detailed can you get into the technology behind the company? I know you said
Sure.
it's evolved and you've pivoted a couple of times, so it sounds like it's forever changing.
So obviously in this is a super data rich environment, and by that I mean the way to think of concrete is a recipe. And depending on the application for concrete, you're going to have a different recipe. So by way of example, the concrete I would use in a column versus the concrete I'd use in a floor slab may have very similar ingredients, but different combination of those ingredients to give you different performance characteristics. I would look for typically higher early strength in a column, because that's going to be a load-bearing member relatively quickly. Whereas in a slab, not so much. Probably want some kind of a earlier set time so I can float it and finish it. But these are all different performance characteristics that become part of the constraints that you're modeling to. You then have to think about all the different input materials that go into concrete. And broadly speaking, they fall into a very few buckets. There's the cement, which is the binding agent that kind of holds things together. When you add water to cement, this forms a paste, and over time, this paste hardens, and that's the key ingredient that holds all the different products together. The main products are the main ingredients that go in that really form the bulk of the product are sand and aggregate. They're kind of the bulking agents. So think of it as if you've got nuts in a cake or flour or something like that, those are the things that are going to be those kind of products. And then you have various chemical admixtures as well, and these chemicals give the concrete different properties, whether it's acceleration of setting time or slowing down of setting time, making the product more viscous. But again, all of these ingredients have their own chemical and physical properties, and that's the kind of level of detail we're really interested in. In the US, in Europe, all these things, and in fact, India, all these different markets we're beginning to operate in, all of these different ingredients are supplied in accordance with specific standards required by code. So in the US, we follow the ASTM code series for the different raw materials as well as concrete manufacture. And that really helps us because the actual characteristics are described according to these different conventions. So when we talk about the aggregate, not only are we interested in the gradation of the different aggregate, but how much water does it absorb? What's its specific gravity? What is the fineness modulus? And all these are different elements that we incorporate into a series of neural networks. And then this allows us to actually model performance using the client's existing data. So, all this physical chemical properties of the different raw materials that come into it, the different recipes, and then the different performance characteristics that have been physically tested in the field and in the laboratory. So once we get that, we start with a kind of a generic model, and then we take these generic models and start training them specifically based on client data. We don't do any physical testing ourselves. Clients have their own laboratories in most cases, or in some cases they outsource the laboratory testing. But we are strictly a data play. We think that's where the real value is. And so how we actually start is we start with a series of predictive models that allow us to look at a mix design based on the physical proportions, the actual mass of these different ingredients that go into it. And concrete's always sold volumetrically. So you're either buying it in a cubic meter or a cubic yard because you're effectively filling a shape. And so what we do then is we're actually able to simulate how that is going to perform. We can understand whether you're going to be able to pump this, what the slump is going to be, how workable the product is going to be on a job site, at what point does it set. what the compressive strength is going to be at 1, 3, 7, 28 days. And this is the beauty of the modeling process, is that you're not limited to the number of dimensions you can model to. So as long as you've got enough data on these different characteristics, you can incorporate these into the models and actually start understanding the impact of these different chemical and physical properties of raw materials. So once you've got the predictive models done, you then move on to the generative artificial intelligence, because now what you want to be able to do is say, given these outputs and given these constraints that I have, what is the ultimate combination of raw materials that is going to meet these characteristics? And that's the core technology that we have patented within Concrete AI. Our patent is really around that modeling process, around the core technology. And this is what allows us to actually start truly having generative AI output in terms of a product that is not only going to meet the performance requirements, but it's going to do it based on your objective, whether it's lowest cost, lowest embodied carbon, or whatever the best combination of those two is going to be.
So cool. Yeah, a lot of levels. There's obviously a huge global push for sustainability, right? A product like yours, is it feasible or accessible to use for all sizes of companies, or is it more tailored to larger construction outfits?
We've got it structured in a way that we integrate with existing software providers in most cases. It's really interesting. Most small to medium-sized enterprises, even some of the largest, have a third-party, what we call quality management system. And so in the US and North America, the ones that dominate are Plant QC, and STEM. And then, whether we either have integration with an API to extract the data and then push it back with them, or we just do it from a data dump, whether it's from a business warehouse, or whether it's a Domo or Snowflake, or one of these typical BW applications. We can get the data from there. But in some cases, interestingly enough, we've seen clients where they've built their own quality management system, and that it gets kind of interesting for us, because then we got to figure out how we build those integrations. So it really just depends on the client. But there's no one too small. I think, honestly, one of the challenges is that it's a really fragmented industry. If you look at building materials just across the US, when you look at the cement and agri industries, a lot more capital intensive, tend to be a lot more consolidated. Ready mix is a lot more kind of personal, a lot more downstream from these industries, and as a consequence, is a lot more fragmented. But we supply across the board, our services across the board. In some cases, some one plant operations, in the US, certainly doing pretty significant volumes, and then you'll have multiple guys, multiple operation plants that are maybe doing 15 or 20,000 cubic yards a year, and in those cases, it's really probably not worthwhile, because the level of control some of these small operations have, even though they meet code requirements, they're just not as stringent as some of the larger producers are, and so they tend to not only over design, but they tend to over yield as well.
Yeah. Let's shift gears to talk more about you as a leader, because you've likely had to build strong teams to bring your vision to life just across your industry, across your career. What do you usually look for when you're hiring key members, and how important for you is chemistry in a company like Concrete.ai?
Look, I think it's such a different environment when you're in a big corporate environment to when you're starting up.
Yeah, different beast completely.
yeah, totally. I mean, the one reality is, everyone in this company is super flexible. They can, they don't just wear one hat. You're not just kind of stuck in a lane. Everyone crosses over, honestly gives insight and opinion into anything, whether, the marketing and branding kind of side of things, for example, is really interesting because, we've got everyone from our VP of software development, our CTO, everyone providing some input about this. And I think it's pretty healthy. Obviously, at some point, people, you get big enough when you have to start, going into channels. But I think for, the team that we've created here, the thing that I really was most interested in is, how do people actually communicate with each other? Because, this is it's a stressful environment. It really is. These startups, like, you hand to mouth, and, I'd say 89-90% of my job is, looking for investment and funding, and where to next, and, making sure, cash flow is looking good, and, we can justify this expense. We want to move into this market. How are we going to go about it? And so, that and kind of business development all, fall on one side of the business, and we got other guys that are really going to think about the supplying the product and making sure that the client remains happy. And so I think you absolutely need people that can communicate really quickly in terms of what they need from somebody else, but also can be independent enough that if they can't figure out the solution, they can quickly come and go to someone else that can help them find that solution as well. So I think, there's no shrinking violets. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone's really, quick to offer one. And I think the thing I really like about it is there's in most cases, not in every case, I think people are really quick to speak up. We've got an entire range in our workforce from, young 20s, recently out of college, but, super, super smart and have great opinions. And then, me, like, in my 50s, right? It's like, okay, we got this range. And I think the one thing about it is that people in this environment have to get along. And you've got to be able to surface whatever conflict there is relatively quickly, or else, you're going to have a total distraction to what the mission is. And again, I think this is part of the fun of this. It's no one's too important not to do the smallest job, whether it comes to cleaning the office or doing whatever, we all step up and get in. And I think that's everything, people appreciate it about each other here.
Definitely. Yeah, it's such a startup mentality, and it's not for everyone, right? But like, if you've got everyone on the same page and everyone's bought in, it makes such a great environment, such a great culture, and everyone feels it's more of like a flat organization. And if they see you as a CEO leading by example and doing the same things, it just like embeds that in everyone else, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's it's also some of it's a challenge. Like you're used to being able to go and think about staying and, wherever, like the hotels you used to go and stay at for certain companies, because that was the expectation. And that's just not the way it is, right? And like, oh, you get invited to this meeting. I was like, sorry, I just can't justify that expense. I'm sorry. I'm happy to do something by Zoom, but I'm not going to be there in person. And some people take that the wrong way, but it's you're doing it for the right reason at the end of the day.
100%, especially at this stage. How would you describe your leadership style, and how's it evolved over your career from like these larger companies into more of a startup world?
It's just adaptable. I remember probably about 20 years ago going through one of these leadership seminars, and they spoke about the different hats you've got to wear, and it really is situational, right? There are days when you've got to just crack on and just push through this thing, and it's almost like you're being a soldier, right? And the other days you just got to take a step back and say, actually, I hear you. Maybe this is time for a pivot. So it's truly situational. I'd like to think that the one thing I always do is I'm not going to ask someone to do something that I wouldn't. That's just
That's great.
just not something in my DNA anyway. And then also, we have a responsibility as a fiduciary that everybody needs to be aware of here. And we have investors. We got to make sure that we're looking after them and their interests.
Mm.
But also, I think you know, the and this is kind of an it's not just an American thing. I think it's a culture that exists in America that people really do work hard.
Yeah.
And if you look at us, I mean, this is I was really born in South Africa, in Australia, raised in South Africa. One co-founder is French. We have two guys from China here. It's it it's just inherent in the culture of this business. I mean, some of us are here at 5:30 in the morning, and then other guys are here till like 2, 3 in the morning. It's just that's part of the culture, man. And I think as you also have to be able to ask people to take time for themselves.
Right.
Not going to force it, but you can see some guys are really pushing it, and sometimes it's a great thing. Don't get me wrong. I love the amount of effort and excitement that brings. But you can't do it for months on end, and sometimes
Right.
folks are a little bit too close to the candle to actually say, "Hey, let me take a break." And anyway, I think people are getting better at taking long weekends. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, you have to instill that. It's tough, especially when you're so committed to something, so engaged in the work. How with such like an innovative industry like AI and obviously a product like you mentioned, technology is changing all the time. You guys have pivoted and improve it, etc. How do you balance that constant new technology coming out and innovation and all the bells and whistles you could probably add to your product and your service with the business milestones and what customers need and just like the commercial element of it?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, part of it has had to. It's been adapting to. Part of it's been adapting to how we can actually ensure that that product update we're giving to these guys is not only going to add value to them, but it's going to find a way to generate some value for us as well. And this really all depends on how the business model for the product works. So whether it's kind of how are we going to generate revenue? If it's off a fair savings, if it's off a subscription, and if this product I'm going to add, does it create value for the client? And if it does create value for the client, how can I look to monetize that? And and being able to monetize that means being able to critically reason how this is actually going to add to their bottom line. And so I think that's always been a big part of the equation. In the back end, it's a super data rich environment, and there's some value. There's definitely value to having more data that we can access, and then also look to utilize in terms of developing additional add-ons, so additional functionality within the product offering that we have. So that also does become a part of the consideration. The one thing I'm really happy about, I know the one gentleman we hired in the company, a guy called David Wegman, is head of engineering. He's brought a really disciplined approach. Not just in terms of the scrums and everything that's going on in Jira boards, but it's ultimately led us to having a really strong discipline in terms of how the development is done, and being able to look at something and say, okay, we can see how long it's going to take, how much value is that going to add, and this is a part of it's been driven by market forces. It's not even a question. I mean, so for example, one thing that we have had to do, just from a client demand perspective, is given the amount of data we have and the type of data we have, people have been asking us, can you help us create what are known as environmental product declarations? And so these EPDs effectively are like a food label for the product. And why these things are important is that there's really some key metrics within these things that allow people to understand the environmental impact that these products are going to have. So, we can now, we've got to the part where we're really close to third-party certification for this EPD generation process that we're going to have. That's going to actually allow clients to effectively go out and demonstrate to their clients how they can reduce their embodied carbon in concrete by using product A versus product B. That's an AI optimized product. But at the same time, you've got a third party validated methodology of actually saying, look, this is real. There's no BS. There's no greenwashing. This is what it was before. This is what it's going to be thereafter. And if, you're doing a large commercial construction project, maybe it's on who knows, it could be like 40, 50,000 cubic yards of concrete. What's the impact going to be? And if that, yields 2,500 tons of CO2 reduction, that's a pretty big deal. And that actually becomes a differentiator for a ready-mix person when they look into supply materials to clients that have, any kind of ambition when it comes to net zero targets. The reality is the cheapest carbon you're ever going to have to deal with is the carbon you're not going to have to mitigate for. So if you can get rid of that stuff up front, so much so the better. And so for example, that whole product development cycle has been going on with us for, the better part of a year. And it's taken a lot for us to learn and understand what needs to happen. And our head of customer success is a guy called Ryan Henkin-Siefken, who again came from industry, deep knowledge of not only the quality control side of things, but the chemical admixture elements. And he's really taken the lead on developing these environmental product declarations and starting to get this calculated built. And people want this stuff. They need it. Their clients are starting to demand it. And, all of a sudden you have a functionality whereby, someone wants low carbon concrete in their building. They need to understand a couple of things. They need to understand, is there a premium to that? What's it going to cost me? And ultimately, what would it cost me to remove that carbon in the future? And so, we're kind of a one-stop shop where we can give them that whole equation and allow them to make that evaluation. And, that's like those kind of things are the things that differentiate you. I think once you start understanding what your customer's really looking for, that also starts helping you provide the product to clients in a way that get them to actually create additional value, not just on the cost reduction side, but actually having a broader product offering.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's huge. You can see the benefit straight away, and the way that the world's going right now, people being a lot more conscious about this and the initiatives there and the push really. So that's amazing. If we look ahead for the company as a whole, what really excites you most about the future of Concrete.ai? I know we spoke a bit offline. There's some stuff you can't give too much information about, but that's huge.
Yeah, no, exactly. And look, I think, and that's exactly it. I think, two things for me. One is that we have an existing client that's looking us to move into Europe. And the European side of things becomes really interesting because from an environmental sustainability perspective specifically, but even the economy of sustainability, carbon taxes are prolific in Europe. And so there's already this tax mitigation element that if you can start thinking about reducing your embodied carbon within concrete, that is ultimately going to have a benefit from an economic perspective in those contexts. So that's super exciting. But the reality is that, so concrete's the most consumed product on the planet after water. There's 35 billion tons of the stuff that's made every year. But as important as we think America is, our consumption is negligible. It truly is. Between India and China, they consume 30 times as much cement as the US does. We have, that's crazy. I mean, the one client we're currently doing a pilot with in India, and I think I mentioned this to you as well, but their production capacity at the moment is almost 40% more than the entire United States, just one company. And, this is a country where you know, GDP per capita is ramping up really quickly, even a country of north of 1.4 billion people. Um, Capital investment in terms of cement and concrete is ramping up. It's growing. Demand's growing at north of 6% annually, compounded, projected through 2040. The reality is, if we're not present there and we're not having an impact in that environment, don't worry about the economic stuff immediately, but even from an environmental perspective, this is hundreds of millions of tons of CO2 that are going to be generated on an annual basis in these places where we could immediately start having an impact, and that's really the thing that excites me. Myself and Matthew, the co-founder here, happened to go. We were at a trade show in Mumbai earlier this year, and when you just look at the potential, but more than that, when you speak to young people at these trade shows and they want to figure out how they can start embracing this kind of technology that really is, from a deployment perspective, not that difficult. It's not like there's no capital cost to this, but you can have this immediate impact. And the fact that you're having conversations with 20 and 25-year-olds around that, and they totally get it. It's fascinating. Like such a smart young population that are looking to have an impact in any possible way and looking for any avenue to explore. Yeah, it's super exciting. Super exciting.
Love that. Yeah, it's huge. Before we start to wrap, let me ask you a question. Not directly related to your product or anything, but just more in general, because AI and automation, rapid adoption, right, across multiple industries, but obviously within construction as well, it's happening. And there's always this conversation, a growing concern about displacement of jobs in traditional industries. Concrete.ai doesn't do that, obviously, but what's your take on this, especially within the construction sector?
It's going to impact roles. There's no question. I think, ironically, I think it's probably going to be more on the robotics side. We've always kind of taken the approach that with this role that fundamentally ends up working with our software, which is primarily in the quality control, quality management part of the business, we've always seen us as an additive player. So again, the actual software product's name is Concrete Copilot for a reason. It's you have your AI doing mass computation, crunching massive numbers, but at the end of the day, you still need the human to apply judgment, and that's just because there's an understanding not only of environmental conditions, and I just mean effectively weather activity, but you probably could end up modeling as well. But there's also an understanding of your client, and that's part of the challenge with AI. Is it lacks judgment, for one of a better word. It genuinely lacks judgment in terms of what someone else is looking for. And these are things that humans typically are going to communicate with one another at a personal level. And these are things that quality control people can integrate into the parameters that they want for the modeling. And so what always happens is that we'll take the AI to the extreme. So the AI will give the generative artificial intelligence will give feedback that says, this is what the optimum mix looks like. And then the QC person will have a look at it and say, well, I know these guys, that set time is a little bit too late. You're going to have to make an adjustment in terms of the raw materials, add this constraint. And they get to do this functionality within the system. So we've done our best to take care of it because it's an absolute concern. But it's going to have an impact. I think, if I think about it though, I think the reality is that for, good or bad, construction, real wages at kind of the coalface, the worker level, are still relatively low. And even in a super developed country like the US, being able to replace those people with whatever system or robot you want to put into place is not going to be the easiest thing to do right now. I think some of the initial functionality is probably going to be more around things like progress monitoring and reporting. And, one of the things Suffolk was super interested in was the Boston Dynamics had the robot dog
Yeah.
flight. And, what we think at that stage, what we're looking at was having, this dog could walk around, the robot could walk around the project effectively when there was no humans around. So this is great. And then you start doing progress monitoring, and you could do it in a 24/7 cycle. Video, LiDAR, start getting, and effectively start having all your takeoffs from there and start figuring out stuff from that point. And then you think of the whole quantity surveyor role effectively gets eliminated in doing that, because you've got this ongoing quality management part going on in the background. Again, not going to be able to see everything, but you won't be able to see every single defect, and you'd probably still want a human to do some of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think over time it starts eating into it. Bricklaying, that's another one. You ever thought of a bricklaying robot? But they exist. Yeah. And the exoskeletons is another thing. The exoskeleton is going to make a human 3 times more productive. What's the next thing? And that's it's not exactly. It's not a superhero vision that exists.
Yeah, there's so many cool ones out there, especially for like the repetitive tasks that need to be consistent and need to be ideally just running all the time. Like humans get tired or bored or multiple shifts or whatever it is. If you've got one that keeps doing the same thing, that's huge.
But that's, I guess, it's part of the challenge of the robotics, right? Because there's always going to be a hardware play. So there's always probably a higher cost of deployment for the end user. Again, this is, for us, that's one thing we've been adamant about, is that we just want to be strictly data and focus on the data side of AI. We don't want to have laboratories that do testing and stuff like that. That's just, for us, that's redundant. All the testing gets done already at laboratories by a third party. So, why not use the data that they've been using for many, many people, in some cases, more than decades.
It makes sense. Definitely. All right, look, Alex, it has been great having you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all of your insight and about Concrete.ai. I really appreciate it. Where can our listeners find you and the company and keep an eye out on your progress and new developments?
So a pretty simple website, concrete.ai. Off you go. Everything's there. You have links if you're looking for demos. If you want to see some case studies, we've got some really interesting case studies coming up that are going to be posted starting in September. And just we keep regular updates in terms of what is going on, what areas we're moving into, where the software is available, and what kind of support we're able to provide with it through the website. So it's always going to be the best start. We have a LinkedIn page as well, a little bit about the product and Concrete Copilot in there as well. So that'd be great.
Perfect. Well, look, thank you so much again. I look forward to seeing all these developments, especially internationally, and rooting for you guys. Thanks, Alex.
I appreciate it, Greg. Thanks so much.